In 1995, 7 men set off from London on Suzuki DR350s. No GPS, no backup crew, just determination and tape-loaded hi-8 camcorders. Their original plan was to cross the former Soviet Union after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But they kept going, through North and South America, across Africa, 44,000 miles in total. The journey became Mondo Enduro, one of the first ever adventure motorcycling TV series. In this interview, we sit down with Austin Vince, one of the original riders, to hear the story behind the trip, how it changed him, and why sometimes the best adventures are the ones you don't overplan.
The first most important thing is that I'm not an adventurer. I'm a normal person. I've been a maths teacher most of my life in a school, not very adventurous, is it? And but when I was young, I was able to get. I had an older brother who got me into motorcycling, and we between us we had the idea to try and motorcycle across the Soviet Union, which we knew no one had done before. We had that idea in 1992, and so we set off in 1995, 7 of us, and we went across Europe and Central Asia and Siberia. I got to a place called Magadan, which it turns out we were the first Europeans to ever ride motorbikes. I think a couple of Russian people had already, but they hadn't started from Europe. They started from somewhere in Siberia. And then we flew our motorbikes from Magadan to Alaska, drove from Alaska to the bottom of Chile, flew our motorbikes to South Africa, and then drove back to England from South Africa. And so that trip was called Mondo Enduro. It took us 400 days. It was very exciting, changed my life completely. But then after that trip, I went straight back to work, went back to being a maths teacher. It was the 70s. And so motorbikes looked cool. Motorbiking was still cool. Hell's Angels seemed kind of cool. The outlaw thing. There were a lot of books about them. And then we had Evel Knievel was kind of in our lives. So that's a hell of a role model. To have somebody jumping over buses and stuff. And he did a big jump in London. And I saw that as a child. My dad took me to see it. So that was, you just kind of, when you're 10 or 11, you don't understand what is happening. But I could tell that there was something about a motorbike that was better than a car. And
I agree.
And it started there. I would love to have been one of these people who started very young and had a motorbike in the garden and would go, be a child motocross person or something. But I had to wait. So of course that made it sweeter when I finally got there. When I finally got my first motorbike when I was 20 or 19, and it was useless. East German MZ, useless. It was the most exciting. It was like being a helicopter pilot or something. The two things that came together, I suppose, in me is my older brother did a lot of long distance holiday trips, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, on a motorbike, and he was what Americans call an iron butt rider. He would happily ride a motorbike for 400 or 500 miles in a day and do nothing else at all. Just stop for gasoline and cigarettes. And so I kind of had that in the background, but I never went with him anywhere. And then in 1991, this event of the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Warsaw Pact countries, and suddenly you could get into what we now call Eastern Europe. When I was a child, you couldn't go to Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Yugoslavia, unless it was on a very, very strict government-controlled holiday, and nobody would, because of course it wasn't very good. What you wouldn't go to Croatia on holiday when you could go to Spain. So my brother saw a newspaper article in an English newspaper called The Times, and it was in their travel section, and it said all of the strict visa requirements had been relaxed for all of these Eastern European countries overnight. And you could now do what I would like to think civilized countries do. You can just turn up at the airport or turn up at the border. They stamp you in then. They say, right, you've got 4 weeks or whatever, and then they stamp you out when you leave, you know, without having to go, you know, have an interview or fill in loads of forms. So my brother had the idea, and also this coincided with me. I was in the army. I'd just left the army. I was going to become a teacher. I had a kind of quite a long summer holiday free, and my brother said, "Come on, let's go around Eastern Europe." And we got a map out, and we did that thing where we made a line that went through every single country, like a maths puzzle or something. And then we said, okay, there it is. That's what we'll do. And we didn't know, you know, any of these towns. We'd heard of, like, you know, obviously Bucharest or Sofia or Budapest. We'd heard of them, and Belgrade, but we didn't know where we were going. And we got a boat from England to Hamburg, and Hamburg was very close to the East German border. So that afternoon we were in East Germany, and it was just insane. It was just so behind Western Europe. Well, only superficially. I'm not suggesting for a second that 50 years living under a socialist experiment makes you behind. Maybe that makes you in advance. Maybe they were ahead of us socially and culturally, but they were certainly behind us in terms of consumer items. Obviously, the second you get into Eastern Europe, everybody had a Trabant who had a car, but there were hardly any, so the roads were empty. And all these cars that were the same. There were like 5 colors. It was so weird. We didn't know that was what was going to happen. So we rode around Eastern Europe on our street bikes. There was 4 of us. We rode around Eastern Europe, and in Romania, we entered Romania from Hungary, heading east, about a week into the trip. And in the queue next to us were 2 East Germans. Strangely, I've never understood this. 2 East Germans with what we'd now call big single-cylinder trail bikes, and they like sit up high like this, and they looked fantastic, and they had what we'd now call like 70s motocross clothes on, and they just looked like rock stars. They were young, handsome. They handled these motorbikes like legends, and it was late afternoon, and they said, "Come with us. We know a place. We've been here before. We know a place we can all rough camp tonight." So we were on our street bikes and a bit nervous, and we followed them, and they whizzed along, and they they went down this track that led down to a meadow next to a river, and they set up. They had amazing cooking equipment. We had nothing like that. We were just eating in restaurants that we found, and we didn't find them. So they were completely. This is the punchline. They were completely self-sufficient and self-contained. They were confident. They were clearly fearless, and they had a coffee percolator. I'll never forget this, in the field. So this is 1990, and and then in the next morning, so we got up, we had a cup of coffee together, chatted a bit. They spoke a bit of English, I spoke a bit of German. We exchanged addresses, and they literally, like it was a film, they just roared off, and almost doing a wheelie, and the dirt track leading from the road, the tarmac road, down to the meadow, we found that terrifying to drive back up it. We were all like worried, and we were helping each other, pushing and stuff, and they just drove straight up it, you know, on their trail bikes. And so we didn't understand, as usual, we didn't understand what we were looking at. We didn't know what we didn't know, but we could tell that they had something that we did not. And that as street riders, we were missing out on something. So combine that with this astonishing social slap in the face of being in Eastern Europe and seeing what somewhere looks like after 50 years of communism. It was so kind of pure, old-fashioned, uncorrupted. I remember there was no neon lighting anywhere. No signs. If anywhere had a sign, it was hand painted. There was no there seemed to be hardly any plastic, hardly any artificial fibers. Everybody was wearing cotton, wool, leather. Nobody was wearing like tracksuits and things like that. And it just and the pollution. I just couldn't believe what I could see. Factories pouring like bright green liquids into rivers. You could see that all over the place. Smoke everywhere. Massive factories. the massive Soviet, the love of the enormous prestige industrial complex. So it was just, and everyone's white people who looked to me as if they were from another planet, and it was so weird. And we got back from that trip, and my brother said we should do it. That was good fun. That was 3 weeks, and we rode something like 4,000 miles in 3 weeks. It was quite intense. We rode from Munich back to our home in London in one day. That was a big one, including the boat, and we got back from that trip, and there was just a little gentle rumble between us, like we should do something else like that, but even longer. And then that sort of was where the idea came from. And then the final piece was that we thought, okay, let's ride to South Africa. That was the standard thing if you were English and you wanted to do the theatre of riding out from your own front garden, from your house, waving with your parents, waving goodbye to you. The place you would try to get to would be Cape Town. That was the accepted kind of go-to case study. And so we had a meeting with some friends, and we were talking about this. Let's and we all knew we're gonna have to take some time off work, and we thought, okay, maybe that will be. We didn't know what to do, but then somebody said, why don't we try and ride across the Soviet Union instead of going to Cape Town? And somebody knew that you could get a boat from Vladivostok to Japan, and that was a standard thing. The Trans-Siberian Railway Express. That was a slightly adventurous people for their holiday. They would do this long train journey to Vladivostok, and then they would get a boat to Japan, and they'd fly back to England or whatever from Japan. And so somehow we knew about this through some newsletter or something like that. And so that was the plan. Let's ride to Vladivostok. And we thought that would be a bit crazy, not difficult to do, but we just thought that sounded exciting, because very quickly we realized that nobody had any idea what that would be like, what it would look like. So then we started to go to the library. It's mad, isn't it? No internet. We go to the library and start looking at books about Russia and just looking at pictures of what's Russia like. And then the plan was always, when we get to Japan, we'll find a shipping agent and we'll ship our bikes back to England from Japan, and that will be great fun. And somebody said, well, what if we're going to ship them somewhere? Why don't we ship them to America and then ride across America at the end of the trip? That would be fun, and end up in New York. So we thought, oh yeah, that'd be fun. And then somebody said, well, if we ship the bikes to, let's say, Los Angeles, why don't we drive from Los Angeles down to the bottom of Chile and get to Buenos Aires in Argentina and ship the bikes back from Buenos Aires? It's a massive port. It's a busy port. That would be fun. And then in this next sentence, somebody said, well, if we're in Buenos Aires, we might as well ship the bikes to South Africa and drive back through South Africa, because we'll be out there with the bikes. We've already given up our jobs. We'll probably all, the way we were thinking is like, well, we've all got like our sleeping bags with us and our passports, so we might as well do that. So it was, how in the pub, talk is cheap. Everybody's just, oh yeah, we've got these big ideas. Yeah, let's do this thing. But that was the weird thing, was that once we'd had the sentences, those sentences came out of our mouths. Let's do this bit, London to Vladivostok. And then it turned out to be Alaska to Chile, then Cape Town back to London. That we suddenly realized neatly were the 3 longest road trips that you could do on the earth. You could, of course, include driving across Australia, but that's at like only 3,000 miles. So all these other trips, London to Vladivostok, that's 12,500 miles. Should I say it in kilometers? That's 19,000 kilometers.
That's fine.
And then Alaska to Chile is pretty much 30,000 kilometers, and then Cape Town back to London is about 15,000 kilometers. So it was, it just seemed quite neat, and that's where we came up with the idea of calling it Mondo Enduro, to kind of make out that it was this attempt to do these enormous distances, one after another. And then we thought, yeah, we'll get a record. We'll get in the Guinness Book of Records for doing the longest motorbike journey that anyone's ever done. Obviously, we knew We couldn't go in the winter. We'd have to go in the summer. And that's all we knew. And then the big thing about Mondo Enduro was that I was interested in filmmaking, but in those days, the technology didn't really exist for the amateur filmmaker. But we managed to buy a camera in the format that's called High 8. When High 8 was invented, it was a massive step change, technological breakthrough. And what it meant was that you could buy in the high street, in a normal shop, you could buy a broadcast quality video camera. And that had never been possible up until then. So we bought this incredibly expensive camera, filmed our trip as best we could. We didn't really know what we were doing. We had some ideas, but not much skill. And when we got back from Mondo Enduro, we went back to work, but we managed to get the Discovery Channel, Europe, who were based in London. We managed to get them to accept our home movies, and they helped us turn that into into 2 one-hour TV shows, and that went out as Mondo Enduro. So that was a big thing. We were the first people to ever make a motorcycle television program, motorcycle travel, I mean, television program. And it's easy to say, but back then in 1996, long distance motorcycle travel was not a thing that anyone talked about. It wasn't. It had no prizes, no competitions. There were no stars or heroes, there was no one famous for doing it. And so that was the difficult thing, trying to tell or sell to television people the idea that this actually was quite cool. Actually, it was quite interesting. Lots of drawing pictures, drawing stick men on, and then we'd learn, like in Russia. We were in Russia for like 4 or 5 months. So by the end of that, we had learned, let's say, 70 words. And they were the 70 most important words that somebody motorcycling across Russia needs. So we had 0 grammar, but we had these 70 words. And of course, they came up every day. Petrol, benzin, a battery, accumulator, welding, svarkar. So you just had this vocabulary, So when I meet Russian people in London, they find the conversation with me slightly strange. I can't ask them like, what's the weather like, or I can just say, doroga is plokha. That means like, is the road bad? things like that. So, but we squeaked by. We got by, and when it was difficult, things didn't work. You just stayed there until it did work, and there was a kind of, especially in the Siberian Russian part of Mondo Enduro, there was a kind of crushing inevitability to how far we were from any kind of friendly help of any kind. We were 8,000 miles from our mums and dads, and we were, another 8,000 miles from America, where they spoke English. So you just had to, like, as they say in America, you had to suck it up. Just suck it up and just get on with it. So when you're up to your waist in a river trying to push a motorbike through the mud or whatever, I mean, I could just stop and start crying, or which sometimes I wanted to do, like, but you just had to get on with it. 2 things: we were poor, so we wanted to buy the cheapest motorbikes that we could. 2, you might not realize this because of your youth, but in the late 80s, what we'd now call a trail bike didn't exist. So if you look at 1960s motocross events, everybody is on essentially a street bike with knobbly tires, or they're on a bike that is essentially completely built from scratch in a factory or in a workshop, but they're not riding a machine that you can just go and buy. And it took until the late 80s with bikes like the
GS R80 and everything, right? That's what started the movement a bit.
Those are big bikes. The Japanese started putting out 250s and 350s that were not sold as motocross or enduro competition machines. They were sold as commuting bikes. They were sold as street bikes, but which were also dirt bikes. Or you could phrase it as they were dirt bikes, which were street legal, and they came with indicators, proper lights. The engines were detuned slightly. They weren't trick. They had quiet, legal exhausts, things like this. And those bikes didn't exist before the late 80s. And so that was serendipity, in that we were in the right place at the right time. When we saw the East Germans in Romania on their big single cylinder 600s, there was a sensation that they just seemed to have more bike than they needed. And then we saw an article in a magazine about a British guy who rode a DR350 from London to Nairobi through West Africa and then kind of through the Congo on a difficult route. And he said in this article that taking the smaller bike, which up until then nobody would think of doing a big trip like that on a 350, he said taking the smaller bike was the most important decision that he made on the trip. So we were kind of brainwashed by him, really. We never met him, but it just sounded obvious. Like, yeah. You know, you're going to be on rough roads. We can't afford the big bike. We want something small and easy to work with, and it was absolutely the right decision. And now I ride a 250, not even a 3. You know, so now I'm just going down all the time. I would go around the world now on a step through C90 or something like that, or a 125, no problem. I did a big trip around Iran with my wife on a Honda CG 125. It was amazing. Something crazy, like 98 miles to the gallon. So the phrase is less is more. Do you have that in? Yeah. So no one says more is less. Less is more.
I see. And you never considered riding a big trip with a bigger bike? That's just
there was no need. Okay. It would always hold you back. I mean, just get in the way. Because remember, once you leave Western Europe or America, you're not cruising along a freeway at like 85 miles an hour at 110 kilometers an hour, going from city to city in 2 hours. You're creeping, like, you know, in Guatemala or whatever. You're creeping along at 20 miles an hour to not to hit the big holes in the road. I mean, you'd be better off on a bicycle.
Yeah.
You know, so the big cruising bike is a great thing if you had a girlfriend who lived in the city 130 kilometers away and you wanted to go and see her every weekend. Yeah, then I'd go and buy a Honda Africa Twin, you know, immediately, if that's what I was doing. But if you're just kind of noodling along quite slowly because the roads aren't very good, then it's the perfect machine. And remember, we weren't any good. We weren't great motorcyclists, so none of us had the confidence to start thinking about buying R80s, or you know, they were big motorbikes. Well, I'd had a pretty good life up until the time I went on Mondo Enduro, and on Mondo Enduro, I didn't really feel I learned that much about myself, but I learned a lot about other people, the guys on my trip. I have never lived with other men every single day for 400 days with we were never apart. So that was a new experience. I'd been in the army, so I knew something about whatever you might call it, teamwork or something like that. But in the army, it was always accompanied with shouting and the threat of punishment. And there was something, you know, there was always just somebody screaming at you in the army or hysterical. And I discovered, especially in Russia, of course, that there was this whole other world that didn't really quite operate exactly as we did in the West. And so, yeah, sure, maybe 1% of Mondo Enduro time I was learning about myself. I got better at things. I didn't know how to change a tire. I didn't know how to take a wheel off a motorbike on the day we left. I'd never done that in my life. I didn't know how to take a cylinder head off a motorbike and put it back together again wrongly and then had to take it apart again and put it back together correctly. I didn't know any of those things. So I learned some skills. I learned patience on a massive scale, but 99% of Mondo Enduro was learning about other people. And we had thousands of interactions with humble citizens, not hotel clerks or travel professionals who were being paid to be nice to us, to look after us. Just, people by the roadside, old women, farmers, citizens, mechanics, some old woman working at a gas station in Kazakhstan. We were meeting so many kinds of people that I would never have met in my entire life if I had not put myself out there in Siberia, Mexico, or whatever, in the jungle, in the mountain. It was completely incredible. And this is the whole point about what you might call unsupported or independent travel. Is it's not, in my opinion, it's not going to Siberia is not an impressive thing. It's spending a long time in a society interacting with people at a low level, hundreds of low level interactions, trying to get bread, trying to get petrol. I've broken down. Can you help me? Can you get me a truck to get this motorbike to the next town? All this stuff is what's kind of like gone now with our smartphones, Google Translate, and all the apps and the Google Maps. You're never lost. We used to get actually lost and not know where we were, so we'd have to go back like 40 miles, go back to okay, we're in this town now. Oh, it's this way. And it was an incredibly it was a very human experience. That was the point of Mondo Enduro, and that's what's definitely missing when you do organized tours, for example. I organize tours in Spain, but I'm not taking you to Spain to meet Spanish people. I'm taking you to Spain to go on the trails. But if you book a long distance organized tour with a company, they've taken away all of those low level interactions. They've had all them in advance, arranged everything, and you can just ride your motorbike, get to the hotel. Here's a cold beer. Thank you very much. Well, that's great. That's lovely. I love being on holiday. I love luxury. I love staying in hotels that I can't afford. But if there is any growth to be had as a human being doing these trips, it's from the low level interactions and from, in English, we say traveling with vulnerability. Got into what in England we call trail riding, this idea of trying to travel across the countryside on dirt tracks and farmers tracks and dirt roads. So off-road travel, but with no interest in speed or competition or tricks or wheelies or racing. And I realized that obviously you can't be going around the world the whole time, but if you've got a week or 10 days and you go trail riding, and let's say in the Spanish Pyrenees or in northern Spain, you can simulate quite an exciting experience in just a week without having to go to Siberia or the Amazon or the Himalayas. You can do it in Europe, and that was a massive breakthrough. So I did it. Normally you'd think, oh yeah, we would do some little trips in Europe and then think, let's do something big. Let's go around the world. I did it the other way around. We went around the world twice and then thought, how can we carry on doing this, but without having to keep going around the world all the time? And these little weeks in Spain that we started to create, me and my friends, became quite a successful thing, exploring, map reading. And this was before GPS existed. So if you wanted to make your way across the mountains and on a route where there were no signposts at all, a completely dirt track route, you would have to have a map and a compass and a brain. And so we got into that, and then we started creating events where people had to map read their way across the mountains, and they were really, really popular. Quite rightly, because it was exciting. And then, so now that the digital world has happened, kind of almost like exactly coincident with my adult life, really, or certainly since I was 30, it seems more important than ever that we don't spend all day looking at a screen.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm trying to do is I want to encourage. I'm not going to go around the world again. I don't want to do that anymore. But what I do want to do is encourage motorcycle travel. I'm an internationalist. My trips around the world taught me that pretty much most people are very good and very kind and very decent. And what's different from country to country is the government. Main advice they won't want to hear: don't take a smartphone. Don't take any phone. So that's pretty much like asking somebody to cut their own hands off nowadays. But I now realize, as an older man, I'm 59, Max. I now realize that all those low-level interactions, day after day after day, miming, drawing pictures, all that stuff I talked about, that's what made Mondo Enduro the most spectacular experience of my life. And if I had all of that done for me by a machine that I'm holding, it just doesn't seem like it could possibly be as much fun. Oh, and of course, sometimes it was frustrating. Like I said, in Turkey, spending 5 days, which now finding something out that we could find out with one Google search. But other things happened in that 5 days. You know, nightclubs that we went to. We got invited by some army officers to end up at some kind of giant army banquet in a huge palace. I mean, the crazy stuff that happened because we didn't know the answers to the questions. But yeah, don't take a phone. And then the other thing is, if you refuse to listen to that, which is a shame, because that's the main thing. That's absolutely the main thing. The other thing is try and go somewhere where your phone won't work. And then the other thing is go somewhere where people say you mustn't go to that country.
Thank you for watching the video. I hope you have enjoyed it and that you have learned about new perspectives. Maybe you even got inspired to start your own adventure. Please feel free to share this channel with friends, family or colleagues and to leave a like on the video. Thank you again and see you in the next one.